Okay, so welcome back. I just finished all of our embroidery. So I'm back to my instructions. And I am going to just go to the first page where we need to finish our item. Alright, so page 13. You can see the Sweet Land of Liberty was the first embroidery block we did. So first I'm going to just take it off of that embroidery block. So I have this one all by itself. Alright, so what we need to do is using the orange pop ruler, the square one. We need to finish this block to 6.5 by 6.5. All right, so the 6.5 by 6.5 block is the second one on the inside, or it's the first one on the outside. All right, so when I look at this block, all right, it's nice that you can, you can kind of have your embroidery in the middle, so it helps you hold the rulers down. But if you did the block by block quilting, I will tell you that this stitch line that it did on the fabric, so this square that is stitched on the fabric, that tacked down our fabric, you basically want to cut just outside that line all the way around to get the 6.5 by 6.5. So if you don't have our pop rulers, we could do that with the quilting. And again, you could measure it. You could use a regular ruler and just measure that and say, okay, if I line that up, is this 6.5? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And that's 6. And then I have the 1/2 inch flange on this one. So you could, find the appropriate way for you to cut it. I like to cut on the outside of the ruler instead of trying to cut on the inside of the ruler. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to line up my pop ruler. And again, you're just cutting right outside that stitch if you did the block by block. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to cut this. And I can cut 2 sides. See that? And then if you do have a ruler that turns, it makes it nice. I don't, so I'm just going to hand turn this. I'm going to line up these 2 sides that I just cut because I have a 90 degree. Going to hold the ruler down again, and now I'm going to cut the other 2 sides. And when I cut on the outside of the ruler, I kind of like cutting on the outside because guess what? If I make a mistake and veer off, I'm just going to make the square bigger. I'm not going to be cutting into my embroidery. And that's one of the reasons why I cut mine like that. All right. So there is block number 1. It is 6.5 by 6.5 finish. So that's how I would cut that one. All right, so I'm going to set that aside. All right, I'm going to keep going through our notes as we did our other blocks. So the next block we did was the flag, as you can see here. So I am going to right now trim it away from the cherries, and here's what it looks like. Now this one we're going to be doing 2 of the rectangle rulers. So as we can see, we only want to cut the top and the bottom when we layer the rulers together. So we're going to be using both the 6.5 by 8.5 and the 8.5 by 10.5. All right, so let me put the square one. So we're using the 2 big rulers, the 10.5 by 8 and the 6.5 by 8. So we have both of these that we're going to be using. So again, I have this placement line where the quilting was done. And if you kind of look at that, you could basically see where you're going to be cutting the top and bottom only, because it's only going to be the 6.5 wide. So when I cut these two here, I'm going to be cutting it on the 6.5. But I want it to be longer than that. So you're not going to be cutting up these sides. What you're going to be, when you do that, you're going to be using the bigger ruler. So I'm trying to line this up underneath as best I can see it. Let me take this one out. So you can see like my stitching for my placement of where my fabric is. And again, I'm cutting just slightly outside that stitch line. So there is where I'm going to be cutting the two sides. And this is where I'm going to be cutting in here above and below, you know, the top and bottom, so to speak, of the flag. Now, what you need to be aware of is, even though I'm cutting it here and here, those lines have to be extended to get all the way to the other ruler. All right. Hopefully that made sense, but if you cut these right now, you'll have to extend it, you know, about 1 inch on both sides to get it to this particular size. So this I'm going to cut first, just because I think it'll be easier. And if you don't have the pop rulers, again, you're going to be cutting just slightly outside those dash lines. So this is I want to double check, 8.5 by 10.5. So our flag is going to finish 10.5 wide, but only 6.5 this way, lengthwise, or the opposite of what I just said. So I'm trying to be really careful. All right, so I should be able to lift that up. See, I can lift that up and out of there. All right, now I could just finish cutting this stabilizer just to get it out of the way on both the top and the bottom. See that? All right. So I cut this first just to show you what happens. And that didn't cut exactly right, so I'm going to trim that. So see what happens here when you had lined this up this way. That's where I got that now. But when I put the smaller one inside, and I go to cut the top of the star, see, it doesn't go all the way to the edge. So I would have still had to have taken this off and cut it all the way to those edges. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to use a straight ruler. I know where I'm cutting because I have this dash line. Now, if you don't have the dash line, then you've got to measure it. So I'm going to line it up, my dash line, right with the kind of the edge of my ruler, but just a little bit over, because I'm cutting just to the outside of that placement line for the fabric, and I'm just going to cut it all the way down edge to edge. And then I'm not using the ruler and then extending it, right? So this way I'm just cutting it the one time and the one time only. So this is going to finish, right, 6.5 by 10.5. So that is our flag, 6.5 by 10.5. So that's what it's going to look like. 10.5 this way, 6.5 this way. So that is the second block. All right, so I'm going to pass that one over there. I still have some scraps laying here on the table. I'm going to flip my pages. We're to the cherry now, page 19. So here's the cherry. And our cherry is going to finish 4.5 by 4.5. And again, if you did the quilting and we did the block by block, you can see there's your 4.5 by 4.5 inch square. The 4.5 by 4.5 is the smallest pop ruler, and you're going to be cutting on the inside of the pop ruler. And all I'm doing is I'm just looking at this and saying, yep, that is exactly where I'm cutting, is right outside the stitch line. So what I'm going to do again, instead of using them, because I'm not good at using them on the inside as well as I am on the outside, I am just going to use a regular ruler. I'm going to cut one side off, edge to edge. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to again line up the ruler right on the edge of that stitch line, but I'm also going to line up a line on the ruler on the bottom so that I know that I'm getting a 90-degree cut. So I'm lining this up on anything on my ruler, doesn't matter where, just so I can line it up all the way across. And this one is just outside that stitch line. And I'm going to cut it all the way over. Okay? So now I have 2 done. Again, I'm going to cut this third side. Again, I am going to line up 2 lines. I want to make sure that I get a 90-degree cut. So I want to make sure that this is lined up on a line on my ruler, and I'm cutting just outside that stitch line. I just want to make sure that this is all squared up when we're done. Again, lining 2 of them up. All right. So this is your 4.5 by 4.5 inch square. And if I set it down here, whoop, this is kind of under it. You can basically see that it's snug inside that 4.5 by 4.5 inch. All right. So there is your cherries. So taking my scraps and moving them to the side, because I will keep most of my scraps to use on other projects, because usually you have some smaller things you need to do on projects. All right, it looks like we're coming to the cake next. So we start our cutting instructions on the cake on page 22. So visually center the cake in the 6.5 by 8.5 and the 8.5 by 10.5 orange pop rulers. So this is similar to the flag. So first, you know, here remember I kept just hooping the next one, the next one, the next one, trying to save my stabilizer, so I didn't cut each one out as we went. I kind of left them hooked up. So here we go. We need the 2 large rectangles, and again I do have that quilting line on this, so I kind of know where to place the pop ruler almost right out the bat. All right, so what we're doing is it's only going to be 6.5 wide, but it's going to be 10.5 tall. All right, so this line here gets cut and this line gets cut, and then it has to be extended to these lines down there. Now, when I lined up the first ruler, I can tell you that I am again using the quilting basting stitch that it did on the fabric that based it down, because that basically is right where you're cutting, is just outside the stitches on the top and bottom of this. So I'm going to move my papers out of the way because I don't want to cut them. So again, I am cutting the top and bottom in the to get those 2 lines, because I'm going to be this tall, 10.5 tall. What I'm not going to be is that wide. I'm not going to be 8.5. We're only going to be 6.5 wide. So if I nest these 2 together, now I want to go up and down. But I do know that these lines that I am doing up and down, guess what, are not going to go edge to edge. So I will have to remove the rulers. Right? See? It only goes to here. And I have to extend this line all the way down. So I have to do that extension of the line on both sides. I have to extend it to the bottom of my block. So I extend it that way. And then I also have to come to the top and cut that piece off. Alright. Hopefully you can kind of see what I'm doing. And then again, I can see where I cut it. So I want to make sure I go all the way to the end and all the way to the top. Just want to get that piece of fabric out of there. Now this piece of fabric, I'm not going to worry about. It's been quilted and it has the batting in it. Alright, so this is basically what it looks like when you're finished. So I'm just double checking. So our finished size is 6.5 wide by 10.5 tall. Alright. So that's what it looks like. So in this one, I'm not sure why we didn't pick a quilting design that was 6 by 10. Maybe I picked the wrong one. I'm not sure. But I do have batting in this side seam when we go to sew this one together. So I'm hoping I did not do something wrong with that. Yeah, so I'm 6.5 wide. So I think this design should have been 6 by 10. And maybe you understand what I'm saying, maybe you don't understand what I'm saying, but the cake was block number 5 and it said to quilt it with a 6 by 10. Maybe I didn't pick a 6 by 10. That's all I can figure, because I do have batting in this seam allowance on the sides. I don't have it at the top and bottom, but I do on the sides for some reason. So I, just need to be careful when I go to sew that together later. Okay, working now on the next one, which is the pot. The pot is on page 26, and we're going to be cutting this with the square ruler. Square the finished block. Oh, it just says not the square ruler, the rectangle ruler. 4.5 by 6.5. All right, so let me get my little plant out of here. And what was cut out of this was the blocks that we did. This one, remember, I just kept going until I did all these embroideries. Then I came back and we cut this out, and then I cut it in half, and then we sewed it together so that we could quilt it, because you had to sew them to do the embroidery piece of that, and then come back and sew it together, then do the quilting piece. All right, so here you go. Here's what the plant looks like. And you can see here I used a dark blue basting stitch to tack down my fabric. If you line up your square, and it is 4.5 by 6.5, you can see again that I am basically cutting just outside of that stitch line. So if you wanted to do it with your rulers, you would cut, right? You would cut your 2 sides, then cut your other 2 sides. If you didn't want to and you did the quilting like I did, guess what? All I'm going to do is I'm just going to cut edge to edge here, right outside of that stitch line. And if I wanted to keep it square, I would just line up. I did one cut. Now I'm just going to line up this one with the edge of the fabric I just cut and right outside of that stitch line and go straight across. And then I know I have a 90-degree angle there, right? So I'm going to line this up across the two at the bottom because that's where my line is. And I want to be right outside of the stitching. I'm just trying to make sure that I keep it square. And here we go again with the last side. Alright, so basically you would have been cutting right inside your pop ruler and you would get that design. So the thing that's nice is if you really do the block by block and it gives you your placement lines for your fabric and you stitch them out, that's basically where you're cutting these blocks. It makes it really kind of nice. Alright, so there's the flower pot. Alright, the next one was these, what did they call them? Pieced blocks. Right, where we pieced all this together. And we did that. And then we had to cut it down the middle. So we did that. And then we sewed a 1/4 inch seam all the way down there. And then what I did was we loaded it up in the embroidery machine again. And we did our quilting design on it because I wanted to have it quilted. So now I need to cut this to size. So this should finish 2.5 by 6.5. So 2.5 by 6.5. So there is no pop ruler that's 2.5. So I am just going to look at this and measure this down. So like I had said before, you should have, I did not trim this all the way around when I cut it out. Because basically it told you to cut it and then trim it all the way around all the sides where that basting stitch was. And I didn't do that. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually trim it now where those basting lines are. And that way it's going to finish now at the 2.5 by 6.5 inch size. And once I cut this, I am going to double check. And this one I already cut this side right down the middle, so when I did that I cut it on there. So all I'm doing now is I just want to get rid of that stabilizer. There we go. Just getting rid of that stabilizer on that one side. So here's what it should look like, and it should be 2.5 by 6.5. Yep. And then when you take your 1/4 inch out of here, it'll finish 2 by 6. Because you're going to do a 1/4 inch on each side when you piece it all together in the hoop. So that's what that one looks like. So that is the pieced blocks. All right, the pie. Pie is on page 31. It is 6.5 by 4.5. All right, so again, I want to just get it away from the watermelon. So I just want to trim right between there because I was just conserving my stabilizer. I still have some tape on here because I was holding the fabric back out of the way. So here's what my pie looks like. So I need to get my rectangle ruler, and we finish 4.5 by 6.5. And I don't know if you can see it, but again, I have that stitch line all the way around. Now, let's say you want to use your pop rulers, right? And you line it up. I'm going to tell you the best thing to do is put 2 together, because it helps hold the ruler where it needs to be held as you use the ruler. Okay? So I'm cutting the inside one. All right, but me having the second one here helps me, you know, keep these all together as I go to cut. So I'm going to line these up, you know, and you're like looking at your space here, your space here, your space on this side, space on this side from the flag, and you're just trying to say, yep, that is centered. All right, I'm gonna put my blade down into the groove. I'm going to go straight across to the other side. All right. And I'm not doing this really fast, just taking my time. And I just want to try to keep my blade as close as I can to the orange pop ruler itself. And I'm going, you know, into those grooves as I go. Now when I go to lift this up, I probably didn't get all the corners cut, but you can see I didn't do bad. I got 3 of the 4 corners. Now what I'll do is, if I didn't get the corners, I'll actually pick it up, right up and out of there, and then figure out which corner that I missed. And it's just a little piece of the stabilizer and a string that got caught in there, so that's not too bad. All right, so there is your pie, 4.5 by 6.5 inch finish. All right, let's flip it over. We are doing the watermelon next, and it also is the same size as the pie, 4.5 by 6.5, and here you go. And you can see my quilting lines here. But again, I like to put 2 pop rulers together, line it up, and then I use both of them to hold it, because I just think it makes it a lot more sturdier when we do that. And if you did have a cutting mat that turns, like a Lazy Susan kind of thing, that does make it very nice. All right, you can see this one, I didn't really get that very nice there, going all the way down to the corner. So what I am going to do, I'm not going to put my pop ruler back on. I don't want to take a chance on, you know, bringing that blade to the inside. So I'm just going to use this ruler and just take this right to the edge. There we go. And cut that out, okay? Nobody said you had to be like fast at doing your cutting. You just need to be as close as you can to the size. Because of course, if you make it smaller than that, guess what? It's not all going to go together. And you might have to do some kind of filler block or something in there if you cut it too small. So there's our watermelon. So I believe that was the last part of doing all of your cutting, except for your borders and stuff like that. So on page 34, we should really start doing the assembly. I'm going to set that aside because I'm not ready to do that. I do want to go get my borders here. So I have my inner borders, and I'm going to get my ruler if I can. I should be able to use the ruler and line up the side and just cut the border out of the stabilizer without cutting the border, and just go, you know, top to bottom and trim it. Now what I'll probably do is I'll just go and I'll do the next one on the same side that I like cutting on. Right? Because now that I have this one cut, then, you know, this one, I will just turn that around and still cut on the same side as my ruler, right? Because that's the side I should be cutting on using my rotary blade. And I'll just trim this one all the way down. Now, I'm not cutting these to size, right? Remember, I'm leaving the full length until we get it on the pillow. Then I can line up maybe where I would like it to start and stop based on the quilting that's on the actual inner and outer borders. Okay, so right now I'm just going to cut all my borders out, and I'll lay them to the side because we won't need them until we actually get our pillow assembled. But while I'm cutting, I'm just going to get everything cut. Right? Just get everything cut out. And this is, I just like to do this all at once because then I'm doing the same thing at the same time, and I'm not cutting each one as I go and getting my table all messy and having scraps all over the place every single time. So I just like to do it all at one time. If you did it as you went, that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. All right. It's just, you know, what I do or how I'm doing it. So I'm going to get the red getting cut out. And basically all I'm trying to do here with this is just cut the stabilizer away and not cut my actual border fabric. Right? I'm just trying to get the stabilizer out of the way. Now you could have left the stabilizer there and just sewn your 1/4 inch based on where your fabric is. But I'm just taking this stabilizer as close to the fabric as I can because I just don't want it in the seam. Right? If I'm going to try and make the seams as the least amount of bulk as I can. So that's all I'm doing. Now you could have taken a pair of scissors and cut close if you wanted to. That's all up to you. I prefer to use my rotary cutter, so that's what I'm going to use. Okay, so there's my inner borders all trimmed on the sides, but not cut to length. I am still not cutting these things to length. All right, the quilting sometimes pulls them in and stuff like that, and that's why we didn't cut them to length to begin with. Now we have our really long borders. And again, what I want to do is I just want to cut the stabilizer away from these borders. All right. Remember, we stitched this, I want to say 4.5 times, right? So we did 4 complete hoopings, and then the last hoop when we went in, I only needed like half of that quilting design to finish quilting this fabric from, you know, with a fabric. And I'm hoping that I don't have to cut anymore when we get to our final assembly. Because remember, we needed, they suggested pre-cutting them 18.5 and 22.5. So I just cut the full width of fabric and just quilted the whole thing. And then I know that I should be able to get an 18.5 and a 22.5 out of each strip, because I need 2 of them. And if that's not the case, then I'm going to go back to my blue fabric that I have, and I'm going to have to load up the quilting design again, and I'm going to have to quilt more of my blue fabric. And the stabilizer's coming out in these pieces. Because remember, that's like the size that we quilted. I did, you know, the 2" by 10". And I kept moving it and moving it and moving it in the hoop. So that's why the stabilizer is looking like that. Okay. So there is one that I have, and here's the other one. You can see, like, when you cut some of these, especially these borders, that you end up with all these little pieces of thread all over the place, you know, and it's just the way that it is done, the way that we're stitching it and all. And you know, you've got some fraying on the edges, and now you know, when I cut this, it trims them all off, you know, and it's just another reason why I like to do all my cutting at one time, you know. And then I kind of use my stabilizers to gather all these little pieces up as I go and put all this in the trash. Alright. What I am going to do real quick is I am going to look at these and just, you know, just for giggles, I'm going to line that up, and I'm going to say, okay, let's say our border does end up at 22.5, just for giggles. That is right here. Okay. And what do I have left? Do I have my 18.5? And my 18.5 goes right here. And I have a half, 1. I almost have 2.5 left. So I have a little bit of playroom right here on these strips of where I do the 22. You know, or where we start and end the 18. You know, because, you know, maybe I want to start it only a 1/4 inch away from this swirl here. So I get that in the seam allowance, and then this starts right at the edge of the border, and then it'll finish down here right after this swirl. So, I mean, when we look at these, that's why I didn't cut them yet. And when you cut your 18, you just need to make sure that you're not cutting into 22.5. So if I mark this at 22.5 from that end, I know I can play a little bit over here with my 18, because you're going to be putting your 18s in first. All right, so even if you wanted to do this one at 18, because you know you're going to start right at this edge and just come up your 18, it's going to end where it ends. And then start your 22.5. But you just need to remember that you can't do both 18s out of the same strip, right? You got to take an 18.5 out of both of the long strips in order to leave you enough of the 22.5 with a fabric. Otherwise, you will have to go and quilt an entire 2.5 inch strip again. All right, so that is what it looks like now that we have all of our pieces, and I just kind of left them in order and flipped them over, cut for our pillow. Guess what? Next is the final assembly.